Episode 1. The Sky Opened. Part 1. My name is Evan Cole, and what I'm about to tell you started with a sound I will hear until the last night I'm alive. Aluminum tearing like paper you can't quite rip straight. That sound split the morning, and then gravity didn't feel like gravity anymore. The aisle warped sideways, coffee flew in slow motion, and the woman across from me mouthed a word I never figured out because the lights cut to red, and the world became a strobe of masks, elbows, and the kind of fear that steals your memory while it's still happening. It was a hop, nothing flight, island to island. A commuter turboprop with seats that still carried the perfume of other people's lives. I'd spent the week calibrating survey gear for a maritime mapping project and was thinking about a shower and a steak. I was in 7A with a window and a plan to sleep through the safety briefing. I almost did, right up until the left engine coughed like an old smoker, and the plane yawed hard enough to show me the sea where the horizon should have been. There's theory, and there's the human body. The theory says brace position saves lives. The body says grab something you love and don't let go. I did both badly, forearms over my head, fingers welded into the fabric of the seat in front of me, while the cabin pitched and the oxygen mask sprang like yellow fruit. A flight attendant shouted to keep the aisles clear in a voice that was too calm for the way the floor shuddered. I heard the pilot say something about feathered and unable to maintain. And then the rest turned to static and prayer. Impact isn't one thing. It's a series of arguments your skeleton loses. First the tail kissed the water, and the kiss was a slap. Then the nose dug, the fuselage twisted, and everyone who had been a person became a piece in a shaken box. My seatbelt bit my hips, my teeth cracked together, and the window turned from a view into a hand that punched me with cold. Water filled the space that air had owned, coming in with the confidence of a landlord. I'd always imagined that if I ever went down in water I'd scream. I didn't. All my oxygen went into doing one decision at a time. Unbuckle? Not yet. You unbuckle and the plane takes you where it wants. And where it wants is down. Grab the cushion? Stupid thought. This wasn't a movie. Find up. You'd think you'd know, but when the fuselage is rolling, up moves around like a liar. The light told me finally, thin and silver and above my left shoulder, so I kicked for it and my knee hit something soft that didn't move, and I didn't think about that because living is a selfish act when it has to be. The cabin door wasn't a door anymore. It was a bright, ragged mouth. I went through it with the others, the ones who were still choosing. The skin of the sea felt like foil, a slick between worlds, and then it broke and I was in wind and sunlight and the taste of fuel on my lips. Someone yelled, "Over here!" But the rotor wash in my head turned voices to weather. The tail sank with a wet sigh, seats bobbed like buoys, a wingtip stuck up like a gravestone. I don't know how long I thrashed before my hands found a floating thing that had once been a service cart. The angle of the sun said late morning. The waves said this part of the ocean had ideas about being bigger. I counted heads because numbers give the mind something to hold even when the hands can't. 5, then 3, then I lost count because a swell lifted me and I swallowed a mouthful of the Pacific, and the Pacific reminded me it doesn't accept apologies. The life rafts didn't deploy. Maybe they were trapped. Maybe the crew never made it to the handles. What I had was the cart. A seat cushion that floated into my reach like a second chance, and the sense that land was somewhere I could point to if I kept the sun on the same side for long enough. A dark smear sat low on the horizon, one of the uninhabited dots on the chart we'd flown over 100 times without naming. A place that barely noticed the map noticed it. Decision, swim or wait. Training says stay near the site. Rescuers search where metal meets water. But training also says evaluate drift, and the current was dragging everything west, and I was not built to be something that drifts without choosing. I tied the cushion under my chest with my belt, a clumsy harness that made me look like a man hugging a cloud, and set the cart in front of me as a tiny prow. The fuel on the surface left a rainbow trail that smelled like a garage and regret. Every 20 strokes I lifted my head to check the smear on the horizon. It didn't get closer so much as bigger around the edges, the way bad news gets bigger when you talk about it. Once I looked back and there was nothing to look back at, just sea doing what it does. That was the moment the part of me that wants witness and ceremony died a small, necessary death. No one would see what I did next. Do it anyway. The sun climbed and pivoted, and I moved under it like a slow hand on a clock. Salt turned my lips to paper. My shoulders cramped into knots you could hang a coat on. I stopped counting strokes because the numbers became a trick the ocean used to make me small. When I closed my eyes between waves, I saw aisles and overhead bins, and the woman's mouth making the word I never heard. The island didn't have a beach you'd send a postcard about. It had a jawline of black rock and the kind of surf that practices cruelty on the weekends. Behind the rock, green rose like steam. I aimed for a crease where the waves were less angry, a slot that might be a channel or a trap depending on the mood of the tide. Twice the breakers lifted me like I weighed nothing and threw me against the thought of stone, scraping my legs with a coral rasp. The third time I timed it with a grunt and slid on the back of a wave into a pocket of water that swirled but didn't slam. I crawled out on hands and knees because standing felt like arrogance. The rock under my palms was rough and warm, and for a minute the world narrowed to the feeling of not being water. I lay on my side and breathed like a man who had been told breathing was a privilege he'd need to earn from now on. When the tremors stopped, I took stock. Cuts along both shins, one deep enough to show fat in a pale grin. Left shoulder angry and radiating pain from the seatbelt kiss. A bruise flowering across the ribs, the color coming on like weather. No phone, no pack, no food, no fresh water, no plan I could hold in a closed fist. 3 priorities: shelter, signal, water, not food. Food is the lie your stomach tells when it wants to be in charge. I tore the cushion free of the belt and wedged it under a rock out of reach of the tide. The cart had surrendered to the reef somewhere behind me. I still had the belt, and in the belt's buckle was a typical miracle, a spark if you were unwise and lucky. I decided to be both later. For now, I needed shade before the sun finished what the salt started. The island's skin changed 20 paces inland. Rock to coarse sand to leaf litter that held the heat like a secret. The green had names I didn't know. I'm an engineer, not a botanist. But even ignorance can spot a palm. Coconuts hung like lanterns above a mat of fallen fronds. I wasn't going up there. Gravity had already made its point. I gathered what had fallen, testing for freshness the way a guide once taught me. Shake for slosh. Look for 3 eyes that haven't sprouted. One sounded like it might still hold an ocean of its own. I smashed it against a rock until the husk bled fibers and the shell cracked. The water inside was half sweet, half metal. All necessary. I drank too fast, and my stomach punished me with a fist of cramp that said even gratitude has rules. Shelter can be architecture or intent. I chose a place under a pandanus that bent like an old man offering his back. I stacked palm fronds into a lean that cared more about shade than poetry, and left a wedge facing the sea so I could see if the sea grew a ship. I wrapped a strip of shirt around the worst cut on my shin and told the rest of me to clot or be ignored. The belt buckle on rock gave me sparks like tiny lies, and after 20 minutes of cursing I had a thread of smoke I blew on until it decided to be flame. Driftwood that had dried in the crooks of branches fed it. The smell of smoke made the place feel less like the edge of a world. Signal next. I dragged pale stones from the high tide line until I had enough to write 3 letters a pilot could read through lazy cloud. SOS. The middle S wanted to be a 5, but I corrected it with a 4th trip to the stones because pride has no place here and clarity does. I smashed a palm frond against the fire because columns of smoke say more than letters when a horizon is busy. Black smudged the perfect sky, and I felt, for a stupid second, like a child showing a drawing to a distracted parent. Afternoon stretched thin and made the shadows long. I walked the cove and learned its geography like a tongue exploring a chipped tooth. On the far side, the rock made a natural pool where the waves topped up but didn't tear. Tiny fish flickered like thoughts just out of reach. Above the pool, clinging to the stone like barnacles with ambition, were mussels. I pried a dozen off with a shard of coral, built a second small firewine break to keep the smoke honest, and steamed the shells in a makeshift bowl I made by folding a thick green frond into itself and pinning it with twigs. The mussels tasted like coins in mercy. When the sun began to slide, the color of the sea changed from blue to the bruised color of a storm that isn't there yet. The wind shifted and brought me another smell under the salt. Plastic and burned wiring. Wreckage. Not of the fuselage, that had sunk in the morning, but something the ocean had felt like returning. I followed my nose around a promontory and found it jammed between two teeth of rock. A carry-on suitcase with a zipper grinning open and a life vest like a deflated promise. Inside the bag, a soaked paperback that would end up giving me fire later, a metal water bottle dented but entire, and a pair of men's walking shoes 2 sizes larger than mine, which made them perfect for a coastal walk where razor coral didn't care about the dignity of bare feet. I went farther than I meant to because hope is a leash you don't feel until it jerks. Debris dotted the foam line, a seat back, a headrest, the plastic cover of a safety card that would become a windbreak, an orange cap from a flare that had never met its fire. I didn't find a raft, I didn't find a body. Part of me was grateful, part of me wondered if gratitude was just cowardice dressed up. Back at the shelter, the fire had slouched to coals. I fed it and built the wall of fronds tighter. Night here doesn't turn on like a switch. It slides in, adding blue until blue is black and black is all there is. The island woke in that dark with a chorus of things I couldn't name. Clicks, croaks, a low chuckle that might have been a bird judging me. Beyond the tree line something big moved with the confidence of weight. I held a burning brand and told my hand not to shake so much the sparks gave me away as prey. This is the part of the story where I'm supposed to say I thought of everyone I loved. I did, but not like a movie montage where laughter and summer rewind in golden light. I thought of them in inventory, names, faces, numbers to press if the world returned phones to me, lengths of time since last call, last apology, last ordinary nothing conversation that would have to become an anchor. I promised each of those facts that I would add to them. That's what a promise is in a place like this, a plan with teeth. Sometime after midnight a different sound threaded the night, a high, distant, artificial ping that came and went like a heartbeat you only notice when it stutters. I held my breath to hear it. There again, not bird, not frog, not wind. ELT, an emergency locator beacon from something that had not yet accepted the deep. The tide would decide what happened to it, but the sound meant this. I wasn't crazy to hope. Machines were still shouting in languages the sky understands. I slept in slices and woke with a kind of start that makes you think there's a name you've forgotten that you should remember before it kills you. At dawn, the sea looked innocent, which is its oldest trick. I drank coconut water again, slower. I reheated the bottle over the coals because warm, sweet things tell the gut we live in a hospitable universe. Then I made a list in the sand with a charred stick like a man who believes lists have power. Water, find a reliable source. Shelter, improve. Signal, maintain. Recon, learn the island. Medical, clean cuts, tools, make. For water I walked inland. Islands like this gather fresh water the way a cupped hand does, gently in the middle. Past the palms the ground sank into a bowl where vines threw a net over the sky. Mosquitoes found me like I had RSVP'd. I followed the dry stream bed until it wasn't dry anymore, until the sound of a trickle became the joy of a thread of water slipping out of rock. I cleared leaves from a basin and watched as the pool filled clear as glass. I let it run for 5 minutes because patience is a filter too, then drank from my cupped palm and felt a century younger. I filled the dented bottle and promised the little spring a name if I lived long enough to deserve to give it one. Back at camp I pulled the bandage from my leg. The edges of the worst cut had puckered, but the center looked clean. I heated a shell in the fire until it was too hot to hold, let it cool just shy of pain, and pressed it around the wound to cauterize stringers of weeping capillaries. I howled. The island didn't care. That's a comfort in a way. Nobody was going to be offended by what it took to survive. Tools, I found a length of aluminum from the seat frame that could be persuaded into a blade if the persuasion was patient. I ground it on stone as if sharpening my future. I braided palm fiber into a cord that would later be not quite good enough, but better than empty hands. I cracked more coconuts because the rhythm of cracking and scraping is the closest thing a man can get to prayer when he needs his God to be a problem solved. By late morning, the horizon to the south grew a mirage on mirage shape that might have been a ship if ships wanted to be rumors. I fed the fire-green fronds to make smoke blacker, higher. I waved a frond like a fool. The shape moved on because the sea is wide and men in bridges look where their charts tell them, not where one smoke thread pretends importance. I didn't let the anger stay. Anger's a thief disguised as a friend. I converted it to work, extended the SOS with driftwood, added a second fire circle on the headland where wind would do my signaling for me when I was asleep or stupid. The island offered me the first kindness I didn't earn at noon. A cloud the shape of a hand moved over the sun and lingered exactly as long as it takes for a human brain to stop thinking about blinding light and start thinking about horizon scans again. In that shade I saw something I'd missed before on the far ledge above the tide line. A stack of stones too neat to be an accident and too old to be recent. A cairn. I climbed to it with the slow reverence of a man approaching a grave and found under the top stone something that didn't belong to rock at all. A glass bottle with a cork, and inside the bottle a scrap of paper the color of teeth. I didn't open it right away. I sat with it in my hand and let the weight of the possibility be heavier than the weight of the glass. When I finally twisted the cork free and shook the paper out into my palm, the writing on it was faint, written with something that wasn't ink and a hand that didn't have time for flourish. 4 words. The first 3 were coordinates. The last was a warning. Don't sleep near trees. I looked up at my shelter, the kindly pandanus bending over me like a blessing, and felt the simplest shiver climb my back. Night here had been loud. Tonight I decided it would be louder. I moved the shelter to the open rock where the wind would annoy instead of comfort, rebuilt the frond lean with the door to the sea. I ringed my sleeping place with a hedgehog of dry sticks whose only purpose was to make noise if something heavy changed its mind about where it wanted to be. I fed both fires until dusk turned to bruise and bruise to black, and then I sat with the bottle between my feet, the message face up, and tried not to imagine roots that learned to walk. The ping returned after midnight, closer, then farther, like the tide was playing fetch with a machine that didn't know it was drowning. I whispered to it, as if the ELT could hear gratitude. Maybe somewhere above the cloud something was hearing it too. I lay on my side, brand in hand, listening for the difference between the footsteps I'd arranged and the footsteps the island might invent. Just before dawn, when exhaustion makes decisions on your behalf, a shape moved at the edge of the firelight. Low, careful, not the wind. A feral dog? A boar? The message on the paper was a drum in my head. The shape paused, lifted its head, and exhaled something that sounded like the end of a word. My hand tightened on the burning stick until my knuckles squeaked. The shape took another 2 steps and entered the orange. It was a man. He was leaner than hunger and bearded like time, wearing a t-shirt bleached to the memory of a color and a necklace of fishing swivels that made a small metallic talk when he breathed. He didn't look at me so much as through me, as if I were a possibility he was interviewing. "You made smoke," he said, voice sanded by disuse. I tried to stand, and my legs decided standing was an elective I hadn't paid for, so I stayed on my hip and nodded. He nodded back, as if we were 2 strangers in a grocery aisle considering the last loaf of bread. "Good," he said. "You're going to need a lot more of it." And that's where the island stopped being a map and started being a story.